Hi, Goodreads. I'm Emily Schultz. This is my novel, LittleThreats. It's out August 4th, 2020. I'm going to read from the first chapter. Please bookmark it. Chapter 1. Jerry Wynn had chosen his daughters' names after presidents, so they would know anything was possible. If they'd been boys, they would have been Jack and Jimmy, or more formally, John and James. But 31 years ago, they had been handed to him screaming, pink and female. The afternoon before his daughter's release from prison, Jerry finished preparing things for Kennedy's arrival. He walked out to his SUV and placed her old army jacket in the front seat so she would have something to wear when she came out of the Heron Valley Correctional Facility. He had commissioned Carter to arrange a new wardrobe for her, but she had forgotten to buy her twin a coat. Already, blouses, pants, belts, and boots were stashed in an upstairs bedroom, and it was Carter's job to bring the cake to the party, although she hadn't said yet whether she would come with him to the prison to fetch her twin. Jerry thought that was strange. Carter had dutifully visited her sister every week throughout her sentence, but had stopped as the release date came closer. He had never understood daughters, much less twins. After he finished making the room, he would call Carter, he thought, try again to convince her what a momentous occasion this was. With the exception of their mother Lane, the family was going to be together again. He was excited to show Kennedy the renovated house. Hers was the only room he hadn't redone. He stood in the doorway often, but didn't cross into the space, as if it were still hers. Now it would be. As he went in, he discovered the bedroom had gathered dust. He remembered changing the sheets before her first parole hearing 5 years ago. She should have been let out then, given that the evidence in the case was purely circumstantial. No weapon, no blood anywhere in the Wynn home. Only that goddamn lock of hair forced her into a plea. The Kimbersons had protested the release at a press conference that time, trotting out their only living child, a boy. Everett was hardly old enough to shave then, let alone read a victim impact statement about what it had been like to lose his big sister when he was just 9. Distasteful, Jerry thought, to use a child that way. Kennedy had been denied that time. This time they hadn't shown, and Kennedy had been given the release date of November 7th, 2008. Jerry gripped the new set of sheets beside his leg. He stared at the contents of her shelves, books, perfume bottles, and banners, ribbons she'd won, tennis trophies. Kennedy and Carter had played doubles until they were 14. On the tennis court, they'd moved like music. His favorite memories of Kennedy involved driving long distance to sporting events. She and Carter were 12, then 13, that little window of time before he would lose them. Even then, he'd known they would go. It was just that he thought it would be to school dances and sleepover parties. Jerry walked over and opened the window, hoping to get some air into the room. The floor around the end of the bed was still strewn with old cassette tapes, titled, personalized, and annotated with a story, known only to the gifter and the giftee. He kneeled down and looked at them. He detested Burke Butler. Until Haley's death, he hadn't even known his daughters and their friend had been involved with him. Jerry had to admit to himself how distracted he'd been that summer, with he and Lane working through things. The hand lettering on one of the cassette cases, from Kennedy to Burke, was loopy and doughy, the O's and A's almost square instead of round. The one from the young man to her had thin, tight lettering, as if he had forced himself to print neatly, pressing hard with the black pen. It didn't occur to Jerry that the fact there were 2 tapes was an upset to the usual order, that Burke Butler should still have been in the possession of the one she'd gifted him. That, or she'd changed her mind about giving it, or perhaps he'd given it back. The song names held nothing for Jerry. They brought no winding ribbon of melody to his mind. For him, it was all teenage code. He gently placed the tapes back on the floor beside a milk crate that housed other homemade Maxells. A woman from the cleaning service was the only other person who had been in Kennedy's room, but years ago, after Jerry had found some jewelry boxes and notebooks moved, the curling iron and the lava lamp all shifted around, he had switched services. Everything has its spot, he'd told her repeatedly. He told the new one not to bother going into that room at all. Now, Jerry tentatively unmade the corners of the old bedding, working around the half-spelled crate of tapes and the crammed racks of CDs. A button stabbed into Kennedy's corkboard read, "Hope Not Fear, Clinton Gore, 92. Earlier that day, he'd made sure to take down the Obama-Biden sign, one of only 2 in their neighborhood, before he got a letter from the Homeowners Association about the election being over. The duvet was dark violet with a spray of lilac pattern across it. Everything had been purple that year. He recalled the name of the little tub of trouble she'd used on her hair, Manic Panic Violet. Kennedy had stained all the towels with each dye job. Jerry remembered Lane had cried over the steeple gray Williams-Sonoma ones, blemished with streaks of violet. She shouted that Kennedy didn't respect her. Kennedy shouted there was more to life than money. He thought he'd have to draft a lawyer's letter to force the two women to communicate again. The tops of Kennedy's ears were violet for weeks, like she had a bad sunburn. Lane and Jerry had hated their girls' style choices at the time, each new one cutting more. The short, bell-shaped dresses, the clunky mannish boots, the distressed clothes from charity stores. What were they rebelling so hard against? He couldn't believe it when he started seeing Salvation Army on the credit card bill. He took it as a slight against all he'd worked for. The girls were honors students at the best public school in the county. Even if it had some lower-income residents from Longwood, Liberty High School had a great arts program and athletics, the kind of place he'd dreamed about attending when he was a kid. Jerry lifted the duvet up and smelled it. It didn't smell like Kennedy. The scent was musty, like old cigarettes, though he'd quit, and no one had smoked in the house in at least a decade. He still had time to clean it. Jerry stripped the bedding quickly. Years since he made a bed himself. How was this to be done? He stepped on a cassette case on the floor and felt it crack. Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. The cassette read when he picked it up. He set it on the bookshelf. He tugged the new mauve sheet over the mattress. After years on a prison cot, a person deserved a well-made bed. When Jerry was satisfied, he gathered up the old duvet and went across the hallway to his home office. He dropped the duvet in a leather chair and went to the phone on his large carved desk. He had Carter's cell number programmed into his speed dial, and although she almost always picked up, this time it went to voicemail. "Carter, it's Dad," he said, cringing at his own adherence to tradition. She'd insisted on calling him Jerry since her days in rehab at 22, when she said they needed to deal with each other on adult terms. "I really think you should plan to be here for more than the dinner. Come out on the drive with me. Just come by and we'll ride together. Leaving at 10. He hoped the deadline might work. Jerry set the phone down and scooped up the duvet. Downstairs in the mudroom, he crammed the whole thing into the washing machine. But as he measured the liquid soap, he looked down and noticed a zipper ran along one edge of the purple cover. The cover should probably be separated from the duvet, Jerry realized. He yanked the bedding back out and unzipped the cover, shaking and pulling. The white, fluffy comforter inside tumbled out. With it came a perfectly folded 1-by-1-inch square of notebook paper, the end of it tucked inside, so it formed a little envelope made out of itself. Jerry stared at the shape it made against the porcelain tile of the laundry room. He left the bedding where it lay and picked up the tiny note. As he stooped to pick it up, he felt a burning sensation in his fingertips. His cardiologist had warned him about leaning over. Avoid raking leaves or taking the golf bag out of the trunk, the man had said, as if Jerry had had the nerve to show his face at the club in the last 15 years. His fingers fumbled for the thin paper before grasping it. He breathed deeply and straightened. Holding it between his thumb and his index finger, he peered at it like it was a fossil discovered on a beach. If the police hadn't found it all those years ago, Kennedy must have shoved it so far inside they'd overlooked it, or perhaps it had felt like a tag and they didn't pull it out. He carried it across the hall to his office and set it gently on the desk, staring at the tiny white square shape it made there, in the middle of the leather blotter between the stapler and the letter opener. He reached out and slowly unfolded it. Thank you. This is Little Threats. It's available August 4th, 2020. Please bookmark it.